I'm going to start with a quick introduction of you. I won't take too much of everyone's time. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to this session with Mr. Porter Erisman. He is the former vice president of Alibaba Group. That's in 2000 to 2008. China's internet giant. You may have heard of it. He witnessed its growth from humble beginnings into the world's largest e-commerce website or company. So after studying his MBA in the States, he went back to China and worked for Ogilvy and Mather in Beijing, overseeing an internet marketing group as China's internet scene began to take off. Lured by the excitement of joining an internet startup, he joined a little startup called Alibaba.com in 2000. So while he was VP of Alibaba.com and Alibaba Group, at various times he was leading the company's international website operations, international marketing, and corporate affairs. In his other life, he's also a speaker, a writer, and an award-winning documentary filmmaker. Mr. Porter, is there nothing that you cannot do, sir? So welcome. We're really happy to have you with us. I think you do have some slides that you want to share with your presentation. So the floor is yours.
Great. And just to make sure you can hear me okay, is that right?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. All right, well, yeah, thank you so much, Hazwan, and also thanks to the government of Sarawak and for organizing this conference. It's obviously very important right now, and it's kind of curious these days that you would choose an American to give advice on dealing with coronavirus because we're the worst country in the world for it. But I've got hopefully a unique experience because, as you know, I worked inside Alibaba during the SARS pandemic, and I have a lot in my talk today of lessons that I learned and observed, not just at Alibaba, but also out of the SARS epidemic. So hopefully people will walk away with some inspiration here. And I'm hoping the tech is working fine. It doesn't always work, but you can hear me fine still, yes?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'll start my slideshow here. My first time on the virtual version, so let's see how this works. Okay, here we go. Share screen. There we go. Okay. Great. So can you see my slides there?
Oh, yep, it's all good.
Can you see me while I'm talking or just the slides?
I believe, yeah, we can see you. Yep, we can see you while you're presenting, sure.
Okay, well, too bad for you, but good for me because you can get my point. So anyways, today, I'm going to be talking about the impact of COVID on online retail. And I think there are going to be a lot of great lessons that come out of that, but I also hope that I can share with you some inspiring stories about how Sarawak and, actually anywhere in Malaysia, but particularly where you all are, the opportunities and hopefully give your entrepreneurs a sense of how in the middle of this crisis, there are still great opportunities. And let me first say, obviously, this is a challenging time. To share some personal story, my father and 6 other family members got coronavirus and recovered from it. So as I talk about all these opportunities, I'm well aware of how tough it is for people going through it right now. Luckily, it worked out for us, but hopefully I'll also discuss, how we can move forward even while we're somewhat in a new era. So I want to start by asking a question, which is, I know you had Randy Zuckerberg speaking, and so I'm going to ask you, where will the next Facebook come from? Or the next Amazon? Or the next Google? Or the next Alibaba? Now I'm going to say something bold, and I mean it sincerely, that I think that next great internet company, there's no reason why it couldn't come from Sarawak. And I do hope this is Sarawak right here, yes? Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I've been to Malaysia. I've never been to Sarawak, but I can't wait to go. So let me go ahead and introduce a little bit about myself. So you gave a great introduction. I'll just add that I had a chance to work really closely with Jack Ma at Alibaba. I saw a lot of ups and downs with the company. And then afterwards, as you mentioned, I made a documentary film about my experience working in the company. I wrote a book and then another book called 6 Billion Shoppers. So I extended my interest and hopefully some knowledge beyond just China and Alibaba, but began to look at e-commerce in emerging markets. And so I've spent the last like 10 years traveling to 40 different countries. I prefer to go to emerging markets. And my travels actually have taken me to Malaysia to talk about the Alibaba experience. And I'll just share with you a little anecdote. I remember when I was in Kuala Lumpur at a university there, and someone said to me, well, I know that China is huge, so Alibaba grew to be a big global company, but that's China, okay? We're Malaysia, we're smaller. What do you recommend for companies in Malaysia? Because we're operating in a much smaller market. And I would just say, I would challenge everyone to think globally, because Malaysia has a lot of great advantages, a lot of great engineers, a global mindset, and then also great English proficiency. So a lot of advantages. So I truly believe a global company, tech company, could come out of Sarawak. But today I'm going to talk about, oops, sorry, my slides here on Zoom are advancing there. So today I'm going to talk about doing e-commerce in the COVID era, inside the e-commerce boom in emerging markets, creating a supportive environment for digital innovation, and future trends and opportunities. But I'd like to start by, wait, are you able to hear my video? Do you know? I might need to reset that.
I don't think so.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, I'll go back and set that up so you can hear the sound.
Sure.
But doing e-commerce in the COVID era, inside the e-commerce boom in emerging markets, creating a supportive environment for digital innovation, future trends, and opportunities. So let me restart the share with the sound. There we go. Okay. Now we go back to that. Okay, but the first question people ask me is, what was it like to work at Alibaba? And I tell people it was just like working in any internet company. And I have a video of a typical company meeting so you can see that it's just right. So let me show you what a typical company meeting at Alibaba was like.
It was an amazing feeling to look around Yellow Dragon Stadium and see that our team had grown to fill 16,000 seats. It was hard to believe that this was the same Chinese internet company I joined 10 years earlier, just as it moved out of a small apartment. And leading us through our improbable journey was this former English teacher, Jack Ma. In 1999, he and 17 friends had started Alibaba.com in his apartment. I greeted Jack as he walked in. I had worked as a vice president in his company for nearly 10 years, as our team survived the internet bubble, fought a war with eBay, and managed to build China's first global internet company. I settled into my seat and wondered, how would Jack address us on this important night? And then, just like any other billionaire in the same situation, Jack took the stage. Well, it may not have been typical for a company chairman, but it wasn't surprising coming from Jack. People outside the company assumed he was crazy, but those of us inside the company knew better. This is the story, in my own words and in the most honest way possible, of what I saw and what I learned from a teacher, his dream, and his country.
Okay, so were you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay.
That was amazing.
Well, it's yeah, that was what a typical day was like. I'm gonna just do a little technical change
Yeah.
here real quick. 1 second. Um, there we go. Okay, now good. So
The
okay,
porter,
there we
I
go.
did notice that you didn't actually get up and stand up and start dancing, right? You were just sitting there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the early shows, I did have to get on stage. So basically, how it worked was that every year we would have these all company meetings, and then it just grew and grew over time. And so
Yeah.
in the early days, I did. And last year at the Alibaba's 20th anniversary, they invited me to get on stage and wish Jack Ma happy birthday with 70,000 people. So that was quite an experience to see how far Alibaba has come. But can you see my slides now?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. So I'll walk you through. So you've seen now what it was like with Jack Ma in this big stadium, but I want to go back to the beginning because I think the story of e-commerce in Asia and emerging markets is really growing out of the Alibaba story. So I'll just quickly talk about Jack Ma and who he is. Most of you know he was a former English teacher. He really had no business experience. And he learned English from meeting with foreigners who came to walk around the West Lake in Hangzhou, where he grew up. And Hangzhou was one of the few places open to foreign tourists when he was a kid. And so he was one of the first really Chinese to go out and really meet foreigners. He had a real curiosity, and that led him to a number of different adventures in life. But I think the main lesson from that is that he grew up curious about international cultures, about people from around the world, and that gave him a mindset that really helped him create a global company. And when you talk about what Jack Ma would say, the 3 requirements for building a global business, and this is back in 2000 when I joined Alibaba, he would say this. He really would say, look, all you need is a computer, and today you'd say, or a cell phone. You need internet connection and human brain. And I think it's very liberating to see that these are really the only things you need. And it's a way of saying the opportunities are open to really anyone. And a really important thing to know, if you're not aware, is that most of Alibaba's core businesses. So now if you take Alibaba Group and you take Ant Financial, which is the financial group that grew out of Alibaba, if you combine the two of them, their combined value is almost $1 trillion US market cap, $1 trillion. And the interesting thing is those main businesses that make it that big and that valuable, they were started when Alibaba was in quarantine. So I'll walk you through the story. Back in 2003, I was working at Alibaba in the Hangzhou headquarters, and that's when the SARS epidemic was going on. And you all remember SARS. Here in the US, people they didn't really experience SARS, which is why the US is doing such a terrible job of handling coronavirus. But we went, including me, we went to the Canton Fair in Guangzhou and the peak SARS time. And the colleague I was sitting next to ended up becoming a confirmed SARS case. And she was put in the hospital. She ultimately recovered, but she was quarantined in the hospital. Then me and 400 other Alibaba colleagues in the headquarters were sent home to work from home. We were quarantined for about 14 days. So it sounds familiar now. It feels like we're all under quarantine.
Yeah.
But during that time, while we were in quarantine, that Jack had a secret team in the original Alibaba apartment. And this team of entrepreneurs were really from Alibaba Group. They were working on a secret project called Taobao, which you might know. Taobao grew into Tmall, which grew into really all of Alibaba's consumer e-commerce businesses. And the team, in order to stay awake and energetic while they're in quarantine, they would do handstands to just try to keep their spirits up while working in quarantine. So think about it. The company was facing this dire emergency. We had a colleague who we didn't know if she would survive or not. Even we wondered if we would survive because SARS was obviously very deadly. Yet the team kept our websites running while we were working from home, even to the point, I'll give you one example. We had all the phone calls routed to homes, and then of course everyone was using a landline. Well, even the grandma and grandpa in the home were asked to answer the phone, and when they answered, they said, "Hello, Alibaba," and then handed it to their grandson or granddaughter who was working at Alibaba. So we kept this seamless operation. The website's up and running. Even people in Malaysia using our website had no idea that we were all in quarantine. But out of that came Taobao, which became Alibaba's consumer e-commerce websites, and which last year, if you look at Singles Day, which most of you know is this major 24-hour shopping holiday in China, Singles Day is this 24-hour festival, and last year was Taylor Swift came and performed at it. And in a 24-hour period, there were 38.4 billion US dollars of transactions done in 24 hours, 1.3 billion packages sent through as a result of transactions on Alibaba's consumer websites. And that's more than 2.5 times the US total sales on Black Friday, Cyber Monday combined of all websites. So this is coming from a place where people thought e-commerce would never even work. And then, very importantly, is that 90% of the sales were done on mobile devices. So truly now you have a shopping mall in every pocket. I think in Malaysia, people already know this, they're used to this. But there was a time people said, well, e-commerce will never move from the desktop to the laptop to the mobile device. And obviously, it's worked out very well that way. So I think very importantly, too, is during this time, e-commerce really exploded in China. E-commerce was moving somewhat slowly, and we were out there pushing and pushing, trying to get people to do e-commerce. But when people were not allowed to meet face-to-face, e-commerce was the only way for them to do commerce and to do business. And so you saw this huge acceleration of e-commerce. And the interesting thing is it didn't go back to where it was. It accelerated, e-commerce grew, and it stayed at a new level. And is really what was the spark that set off e-commerce in China. You're seeing this same thing happen around the world. Countries, I was just talking to some people in Colombia, and e-commerce was pretty slow taking off. It was almost like China 15 years ago. And it's accelerated e-commerce maybe 5 years ahead of where it would have been, because it's the only way people can really do business. So how did that happen with Alibaba? How did Alibaba grow from that apartment during the quarantine into this giant company? I want to share some of the story because I think that in Malaysia, you can learn from this experience, because so many people study Western e-commerce models. I know a lot of people study Alibaba, but I want to give you a little sense of the history of how e-commerce developed in the West, how it developed in Asia, because then you can see where Malaysia fits in. So my view is this. So these right here, if you can see these stores on the slide, this is here in Colorado where I am. These were old stores, maybe more than 100 years ago, out on the American frontier. This is how retail was done, 100 years ago. A general store, each general store would take a 40% profit margin on products. It was the only way for someone in a small mining town to get products. Well, over time, that was obviously very inefficient, but over time it matured into shopping malls, big box retailers, and then of course Walmart, which used scale and technology to drive down prices. And before the internet, it looked like Walmart was about to take over all of US retail. But the internet came along, and when it did, Amazon looked at Walmart and said, wow, they're using scale, they're using technology, getting efficient, but we don't need physical storefronts all around the US. We can use the internet as our storefront, but have this very efficient back-end system. So Amazon was building on hundreds of years of gradual retail evolution. And I remember back in 2000 when I joined Alibaba, when Jeff Bezos was on the cover of Time magazine as the person of the year, people said there are two companies that are going to win globally. It'll either be Amazon or it'll be eBay. But e-commerce took a different path. I think these are shop houses in Singapore, but they probably could be just as easily familiar in places in Malaysia. So really the East was different, especially in China. And in 1999, when Alibaba got started, I was working in Beijing with a bunch of internet companies as my clients. And I remember people saying that e-commerce will never work in China. And they said, first of all, less than 1% of the population is using the internet. People don't use credit cards. There are poor logistics, government controls of the internet. And then people in China don't trust each other. You know, I remember when we were getting started with Alibaba in Malaysia, the only complaint we ever got about our name was someone wrote us from Malaysia and said, oh, Alibaba in Malaysia, this is a term for like a thief or a con man or something. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it was a poor name for Malaysia, but luckily people know the story of Alibaba, and Jack Ma chose it because it was like saying open sesame to a treasure for these small, medium-sized enterprises. But trust is a big problem in online commerce. And then also people said all the internet experts are in Silicon Valley. How could we possibly build a global internet company from here? Now, maybe in Sarawak, people will say the same thing. They say, well, all the big companies are now in China or based in or Kuala Lumpur. My view is that it can be anywhere because we had advantages being in China that we wouldn't have had if we were in Silicon Valley. So Jack Ma pulled his team into an apartment and started a B2B marketplace for global trade. And our theory was, let's not do like the big Western companies like Amazon. We realized that our sellers, just like I'm sure in Malaysia, there's a mix of some big retailers, but also these really strong entrepreneurs. I know there's an independent spirit where you are. And we realized that all of our members just wanted a platform. They just wanted a place where they could post their products and they wanted to be in charge. You know, in China, they have a saying, probably Malaysia, something similar. China, they say, better to be the head of a chicken than the tail of a phoenix. Is there a similar saying in Malaysia? I'll explain what this means, which is, you know, it's much better to be the boss of a small ball bearing exporter than just a middle manager in a big multinational. People in China wanted to be their own boss. They were real entrepreneurs. So we just empowered them to be entrepreneurs. And we brought the human experience online. So here we are in a time where people cannot meet very easily face to face. Well, what we did was we said, let's just make the experience as human as possible. Let's build a marketplace that's really about people and community and not just some cold technical platform. And so what we did is we looked at the small shopkeepers. We said, this is our business, not the big retailers. And we went to all the mom and pop shops and created Taobao for them to sell on. We made it really colorful, exciting. It's more like an Asian style. It's not like a European design. We made it colorful, flashy, a lot going on the website. And we also made it very social. We let people negotiate. You know how it is when you go to like the smaller markets in Malaysia, I'm sure the price starts high and then goes down over time. Well, on eBay, the price would start low and go up. So we made it really fit the culture. We brought the human experience online. Of course, today, as much as you can do that as possible, to think of technology not as a way to like eliminate the human element, but a way to enhance it. And just to give you a sign of how social and human Taobao was, there were so many couples that would meet just from doing business on Taobao. They'd meet, they'd chat, they'd say, hey, let's go have some tea. You seem really interesting. Well, then they started getting married. We had to make a special section of the website to celebrate all the couples who'd gotten married because they met on Taobao. So if you went to someone in China and you said, hey, where did you meet your wife? So I met her on Taobao. That doesn't seem strange. But I never heard anyone in the US say, oh, I met my husband on Amazon.com or something like that. So it's a much more human experience because, as you know, business is much more human in Asia with small and medium-sized businesses. So that's the approach we did. The contrast, now you see Amazon and Alibaba are really the two global e-commerce giants that are now moving into new markets and beginning to butt heads. So they're competing in India, they're competing in Latin America. And they're two different spirits. Amazon is much more of a technical, analytical platform, and Alibaba's websites and its sister websites are much more sort of human, and I'd say better for Asia or emerging markets. So that's the background that gives you hopefully a sense of what I saw when I was at Alibaba and how e-commerce developed. But this is also obviously a conference about the future. And I want to talk about how the retailers in particular in Sarawak and the rest of Malaysia can really approach e-commerce. And I want to talk about the future trends of where I think this is all headed. So first, I want to say welcome to the new normal. So what that means is that just like in China, when SARS hit, e-commerce jumped up and it never came back down. I think that's going to be true for what's happening in Malaysia now and around the world. Basically, the growth of e-commerce has gone ahead maybe 5 years, but I don't think it's going to come back down again. I think it'll this. And you're thinking, should I invest in e-commerce or not? Is now the time? Well, you might as well do it now because this is where things are going. And then once the world gets back to normal, I think we will still keep these habits that we've developed online in e-commerce. And just to give you a sense, it's very tragic, but here's a list of just in the US so far in 2020, the giant retailers that have gone bankrupt. There's unfortunately, e-commerce was already taking away jobs from traditional retailers, and this really accelerated it. I would say the one good thing, if you're a government or policymaker, in emerging markets, e-commerce tends to create more jobs than it destroys. The reason you see so many jobs destroyed in Europe and the US is you had a really traditional retail that had been built up over hundreds of years. And in a lot of cases in Southeast Asia, other countries, it was pretty inefficient. And so e-commerce tends to create more opportunities than it takes away in emerging markets, but in more developed countries, I know Malaysia is somewhere in between kind of emerging market and developed and more mature for sure. But, who's going to win, Amazon or Alibaba? Well, actually, I just think it's e-commerce. It's almost irrelevant. If you look at the stock price since the lockdowns began, you can see that just the normal stock market's been kind of going up and down flat. But Amazon, Alibaba, and then you look around the world in Latin America, there's a company called Mercado Libre. I'm sure you're seeing it with a lot of your local e-commerce companies that just the valuation and the business is really increasing. So the key is this is a trend that is accelerating. I think it's here to stay, and it's worth investing to really jump ahead and not be left behind. The next thing I would say is to understand the history of e-commerce, study the US. To understand the future of e-commerce, study China. And one example, as you're seeing more and more, I'm sure, is that how China is almost a cashless society. Even before the coronavirus, people were surprised in the West when I told them that, yeah, you can go through a day in China with just using your mobile phone for payments. In fact, one of the big reasons is because I remember when I was living in Beijing and I wanted to pay my rent, I would have to wait 45 minutes in a bank just to wire the money to my landlord. If you think about it, what business is serving customers if you have a waiting room full of 20 seats for people to sit and wait? Clearly that's not effective. And so it was much easier for China to leapfrog ahead. And a few years ago when I went to China, I knew I was really in trouble because I went up to try to buy some coffee at this cool looking coffee shop. When I got to the front of the line, I realized they didn't take cash, didn't take credit card, only mobile payments. And at that time, foreigners were not allowed to sign up easily for online payments, so I couldn't even buy the coffee. Finally, now in the US, you're seeing businesses moving to cashless. You're seeing mobile payments really take off. It's exciting for me to see because it just makes sense to move to a more cashless society. How's it on Malaysia? Malaysia is probably, you can go the day with mobile payments now without much trouble. Yeah,
correct. Exactly. So apart from the big ones like Boost and we have some Alipay as well, and GrabPay. In Sarawak, we've got our own e-wallet, Sarawak Pay, that has scaled across the state.
Right. So, and that's one of my lessons. It can come from anywhere. It can come from a big e-commerce company. Even the banks, if they're move quickly and work with the government, they can come up with efficient payment systems. So there's no reason it has to be just one company controlling it. Correct. But to give you an example, Ant Financial, watch the headlines this fall, because any day now, Alibaba's financial group that was spun out of the group is expected to have an IPO, and they're expected to have the largest IPO in history. You know, before this was Alibaba Group was the largest IPO in world history. Then the Saudi Arabia decided to list their oil company. That became the biggest. Well, now Ant Financial is trying to outdo them and become the biggest again. The point being that here's a company which really took off during a SARS quarantine and grew into a giant financial company. So as you probably know, we're in a golden era of e-commerce in emerging markets. And I think what's important to know is that this trend is really, in the last few years, been taking off in India, as you know, throughout Southeast Asia, Latin America, even Africa. And so what it's going to do is unlock the buying power of, that's why my second book is called 6 Billion Shoppers. There are about 6 billion shoppers who were previously inaccessible to retailers. But now, no matter where you are, you could be serving customers in these markets around the world. So you no longer just need to think of selling to your local community or to the people passing by your store. It's truly happening that you could be in Sarawak and selling globally. And to that point, I'd say e-commerce is becoming seamlessly global. Let me give you one example, because often this is happening when you don't even know it, because there are really scrappy, energetic entrepreneurs that could be sitting anywhere in the world that could be your competition, not just somewhere in Malaysia. So one example is, you see this leather handbag here. Well, I was in Lithuania, this tiny European country. I was there a few years ago, and I met a guy. He said, oh, you know, I use Alibaba all the time, and because I have an e-commerce business. And I said, well, wow, Lithuania is a small country. How do you do that? He says, actually, I don't bring any products to Lithuania. I buy leather handbags from India, and I sell them into Australia, and I never even see them. So it's truly global. And the cross-border trade, it's hard to get accurate numbers, but some estimates say it's a $1 trillion worth of cross-border trade happening per year now. And about 50% of online shoppers around the world are buying cross-border. So this is good news if you have something to sell or if you can find something to sell. But it's also a challenge if you have a little shop, because your competition is not just from within Malaysia. It could be from someone sitting in Lithuania. Next, let's say social commerce is booming, especially in Asia. So, you know, one of the things we noticed at Alibaba is eBay didn't allow people to chat with each other. But we saw a trend that, let's say a woman really likes a handbag, and she knows 5 of her friends will love that handbag. And she knows, if I can get my other 5 friends and we all go in and approach a seller, then we can get a good deal by doing a group buy. And so this is something you don't even see in the US, but in China, I'm sure in other parts of Asia, you see how social it is. People get their friends together, they go in and get something and drive the price down. That's just one small example of social commerce. I remember when I was in Thailand a few years ago, and they say, what's the big mall there? The big mall in Bangkok. Anyways, at the major mall, it's the most Instagrammed place in the world, like the most Instagram posts from the major mall in Bangkok. And what I saw happening was people were using Instagram and other things to try and sell online, because the Western e-commerce platforms didn't meet the local needs. And so people just kind of created this makeshift social commerce platform by combining Instagram and payment another way. To me, it showed there was a need not being met, because people wanted to have social commerce. They wanted to see who the seller is, see how many friends they had, see if they knew someone who knew them, because that's how trust is formed. So social commerce is also critically important in Asia. And then now, as I mentioned before, e-commerce is mobile first. I don't need to really tell you that, but it's more important to be having a great storefront or experience on a smartphone than on a computer. Then omni-channel is here to stay. So people were talking about this omni-channel retail for a long time, where you might search online and then pick it up at the store. Finally, in the US, you really see this taking off, where you can go online, you order something, and then someone from the store will actually bring it out to your car. So for example, I take my phone and I say, I'm sitting in a gray Jeep outside your store. You wait in a special place, and a shopkeeper comes and brings it out of the store. Now, people do that for safety, but it's also, I think, a convenience that will stick around in the future, because it's actually easier to shop online and pay online, and then just go pull your car up and they deliver it out to you. So even if you don't want to move, from traditional retail into pure e-commerce, this hybrid is here to stay and becoming more sophisticated. Then I think a very important thing is e-commerce is now a battle between ecosystems or super apps. So when I was at Alibaba, we were thinking our competition is Amazon or eBay. But now, of course, you see ecosystems battling. So you have Alibaba has a payment system, film studios, it has video sharing. At different times it had ride sharing, because these super apps are trying to, as you know, create a very efficient ecosystem where people develop the habit of buying within that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Same is true for Amazon with its video and Prime, and buying a Whole Foods, the retailer. Then Apple is doing it. Jingdong and Tencent have teamed up. So I think if systems and super apps don't really love each other, if you're a seller, you have to navigate sometimes. Sometimes you have to choose sides. Like, I'm going to go all in on the Alibaba platform, or all in on the Gojek platform, or all in on the Tencent. But ideally, retailers can find ways to sell on all the different platforms and decide which one fits them better. But just keep in mind, it's sort of like iOS on the iPhone versus Android. You're two operating systems for commerce. And as a retailer, you need to approach it that way. And Gojek, is Gojek in Malaysia now, or?
No, not yet, I believe. I think they're in Singapore, okay, but not in Malaysia. Malaysia is pretty dominated with Grab as the main super app, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so Grab is obviously really powerful there, but I was really amazed by Gojek, because I think it's an example of how competition can come from anywhere, and then opportunity can come from anywhere. Gojek, my understanding, really started as ride sharing, and that turned out to be the super app that really got people to use their cell phones for transactions. And then once that was working, Gojek started adding, ride sharing, payments, e-commerce, delivery. But then you could order a massage from Gojek, and someone would bring, a massage table to your home, and cleaning service where someone would come and clean, and then Go Glam, where you have someone who'll come and do your nails. Unfortunately, during coronavirus, a lot of these really personal services are probably suffering.
Yeah.
But it does show, there's no reason Gojek or a company like it should be thinking like we were when I was at Alibaba, where when I was at Alibaba, we realized if we can make Alipay successful, it could be the biggest bank in China. And that's what became Ant Financial. There's no reason Gojek couldn't become that as well. So next, and I know we're getting to questions soon, I'll say e-commerce innovation is just beginning. So we think, I think e-commerce originally was just a new channel. You have a store and now you have a new channel. But, the examples you're starting to see in Asia, which in the US aren't around, but this slide shows a billboard in the subway, and people can go in China and scan on the billboard the products they want as if they're at the supermarket. And then sometimes by the time they're home, the products can be delivered to their home or very shortly after they arrive home. And then this is an example of it's like a live streaming fashion show on Alibaba's Tmall website, where on the left you can see there's a really active messages and community being built, and they'll have tens of thousands of people watching a fashion show, and you can buy the items then. There's promotions, discounts. I mean, this is really, really innovative, and the whole live streaming of different product demonstrations is really taken off in China, and it's just now starting to happen in the US. But I would say in the beginning, e-commerce was just about the internet being another channel, just like you have a store here and then you have an online channel. But now you're seeing the full power of e-commerce being used to actually help with innovation, where companies are brands will crowdsource product ideas and build it into their brands so that they're really consumer driven. And then last, this is really my last slide, which I hope is relevant to you all, because I think it's important that there is a role for these public-private partnerships that can help companies navigate the COVID crisis. Now, so I'm from the US. Americans are kind of purists about keeping a real strong separation between government and businesses. But when SARS hit in China, originally the government was mad at us, at Alibaba, because we had gone to the Canton Fair and brought SARS back to Hangzhou and made a huge mess. I mean, the town was so angry at us, like, oh my gosh, you guys are the ones that brought SARS to Hangzhou. But we wanted to change that narrative, and we realized that we had something that other businesses didn't have, is we could help the economy move forward and allow people to do business. So we went to the government, we said, what can we do to help? And we set up seminars going around from city to city in China. And we trained, the government would bring in SMEs and we would get on stage and we would train the retailers how to sell online. It's a totally new practice for some people. And that was one example. Then the government also helped subsidize, where they would pay for people to build an online presence, either on Alibaba or on another website. Yeah. And then the government might pay for training and education, because it's one thing for a company to transition from a physical presence to an online presence. It doesn't just take technology, it takes training, it takes education, and of course some costs, maybe hiring some staff who are really internet savvy. But that was an example of, we partnered with the government and worked on ways to help small, medium-sized businesses to sell online. And that turned out to be pretty strong win-win between Alibaba and the government. So that's really the end of my presentation. Hopefully I've given you a good sense of the trends, given you some inspiration to show that, yes, even in these worst of times, there are opportunities. And I have no doubt that in 20 years, people will look back at this time and say, wow, some of the largest businesses in 2040 were born during this era, when people lost their jobs or things were disrupted and people had to use their innovation and ingenuity to develop new innovative business models. And I can say that from experience, not just from someone who's optimistic. I can say that because that's precisely what Alibaba did. So that's the end of my presentation, and I welcome any discussion or questions.
Well, thank you so much, Porter, for that. I think especially since some of the things you said did answer the questions I had, specifically for what else can the government do, right, to support the SMEs in terms of going digital. So I'm going to go straight to the questions that I've been given from the public. Because I mentioned questions here, particularly I think the first one you mentioned earlier about how you're hoping to see the next internet giant coming out from Sarawak. I think you also mentioned about the battle of the ecosystem or super apps, right? Like, how can we compete, right? I mean, these potential future internet giants coming up from emerging markets. How can we compete with these giants? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I'll give you one example. I went to Bogota, Colombia, about 6 years ago. And I was used to life in Asia and very naive. I walked out, it was my first time in South America. I walked out of my hotel. Within 1 hour, I had 5 people with a knife at my throat and robbing me, and just violence. You know, Colombia was basically a failed state. And the government had sponsored me to go speak in Colombia to give this same talk about, hey, let's, you know, spark some innovation here. But even the government there said, we can't really have e-commerce here. Well, the next time I went back, and I was saying during that trip, I said, look, you can have regional companies come out of Colombia, not just Colombian companies. The next time I went back, I found a company called Rappi, which is, it's a big e-commerce super app company. And it got started in Colombia just about a year after I was there, when people said it was impossible, because the founders of that company, they just said, we're not going to be limited by the fact we're in Colombia. We're not going to let these things stop us. It's just a mindset. And so that's why when I started, I said, how can you compete? Well, you can compete just like any other company. Like, okay, let's say a company is headquartered in Singapore. Well, Singapore is actually a very expensive place to operate. And to be honest, I don't think Singapore is a very easy place, because you have a smaller population, maybe they're less risk-taking. And then I think in Malaysia, you have a real entrepreneurial spirit. And so when we were in China, a lot of people said you need to be in Hong Kong or in Shanghai. We were in a second-tier city. We were in the city of Hangzhou, which, yeah, it's an important city in China, but no one was thinking of starting a global e-commerce company from Hangzhou. They said at least you should be in Silicon Valley, but if you're not going to be there, okay, Shanghai or Beijing, but why Hangzhou? Well, you're probably in a similar situation. It's easier to keep employees when you don't have a million other tech companies to compete with. So what I would say, the only limit is in people's mindsets. And I have seen, first with Alibaba and then companies like Colombia, where people said, you know what, forget, it doesn't matter where we are. Right. Hangzhou just had a great quality of life, and people weren't stealing our employees all the time. And we just built a very strong culture, like you saw in that video. So you can compete, because like Jack Ma said, all you need is internet, human brain, and some device to access the internet.
Cool. All right. So next question, I think this is a bit closer to home as well. So if we were to get a lot more people on e-commerce, So logistics in emerging markets in general, I think, and also relatable to Sarawak, would be a challenge for some areas. Where have you seen where people overcome that, and what have they done to overcome it?
Okay, great question. So every problem is an opportunity. Okay. So of course, if you're a small shop, you can't solve the whole logistics problem. But at Alibaba, you know, all those things I said of why people said e-commerce will never work in China, I mean, it's true. The Chinese Postal Service was really inefficient. It was not something that allowed us to track. So logistics in China were terrible. And so what did Alibaba do? Once it got big enough, they said, we don't even want to be in logistics, but we have no choice. So they brought together logistics providers into a consortium called Cainiao, and then built this logistics consortium. Then another example, okay, in India, when I first went to India, I did consulting for a company called Flipkart. And people said, oh, we have terrible logistics. We don't even have addresses. You know, an address in India would be something like to the left of the mango tree. You know, it's more like a description. I mean, literally in India, they have descriptions of where places are, not addresses. But so Flipkart created its own logistics providers. And think about it. If you can solve that problem, then you have something even more valuable, because you've created a giant logistics company that you can spin off and other people can take advantage of. For example, in Africa or India, where people don't always have addresses, well, the cell phone is perfect because you can just have a geographic coordinate. And then the next thing you know, you create a database of identities linked to GPS coordinates. And then you create the addresses. You have better addresses than the post office.
Yeah.
So I think entrepreneurs view every problem as an opportunity. A small retailer can't solve everything, but if you see the problem with, let's say, logistics, go solve it. And then the last thing I'll say, Indonesia. I met with Tokopedia in Indonesia when they were just getting started. I showed my film to them. What could be more difficult than whatever it is, 17,000 islands trying to do logistics across this huge archipelago? Well, that was the opportunity, because the e-commerce companies could solve that problem.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Porter. Just now when you shared about how, I guess, Taobao becoming, when people got married, meeting up on Taobao, was it? And then, you know,
Yeah.
like effectively you're the precursor to Tinder for China, right? So how big is social commerce now, you see, with Instagram, TikTok? How much influence does it have, you feel, on the future trends of e-commerce?
So I think, well, there's two things. One is sort of like social media used as a marketing channel. So I do think traditional media, I mean, no one, when I was in Beijing working at Ogilvy and Mather, you know, you're thinking of TV ads all the time. Well, now it's social commerce through recommendations, and basically social commerce helps validate brands. And I've started myself, even, I'm surprised, I feel like a sucker because I'm falling for it, but every now and then on Facebook, something will show up like, oh my gosh, this looks like the most comfortable pair of shoes I've ever seen. And I find myself buying it. And I write about shopping. I don't even like shopping. So I think, especially in Asia, where business is done through social networks and where people have a much stronger sense of a group identity, social commerce as a way of building brands and driving traffic to purchases is, it's actually almost replacing traditional media altogether.
So earlier when you shared about the Singles Day, was it Singles Day with the single
Yeah.
largest day? So do you see trends where I guess brands, well, I guess the ones that succeed on the day, they make it, right? But what about brands that get destroyed because they don't make it, or they lose out to the competition on that one single day?
So I think Singles Day was a brilliant marketing move, because what it did for Alibaba was, yes, it generated sales, but it just created this wow factor. So it just generated like PR and headlines, and it helped China buy into e-commerce, because people said, "Oh my gosh, this is getting bigger and bigger every year." They have Taylor Swift. But I will say, is that an efficient way of conducting business where everyone's working for a 24-hour period? I mean, when you see pictures of the packages, you see just these, however, 1 billion packages in warehouses, and then 2 weeks later, that capacity, what are you going to do with it? So I think it's brilliant. I don't think it's a very rational way for the long term to do business. But then again, you have in the US, Amazon Prime has its Prime Day coming up here, because Amazon has basically learned from and copied Singles Day for the US market. I think it's a great for marketing, great for brands. If it's me, I would be very, very careful about it, because that's the type of thing you either go really big or you just wait and fight another battle. You don't want to bet your entire business on one big shopping holiday and get totally lost. I would rather people slowly build up, get sense of where the customer is, what the metrics are, get a really good data, because then you know on that 24-hour period if you can scale up in a big way.
Cool. All right. For the last question for you, and I think this is as a closing remarks, what one piece of advice you would give, and because you've been talking a lot about Alibaba and I guess the big players, right? For the retailer, for the small man, for the SMEs, what would be the one advice you would give them to help them, I guess, survive through this pandemic?
The big advice would be that this is a trend that's going to happen anyways. So now is the time to do it, but that you have to approach it. It's not just building a website, not just building a website, they come, or putting something on a marketplace. You do have to take the time to understand the nature of consumers buying online. But I would say that it's no longer a choice, and you have to, and luckily it's much easier to start into e-commerce than build out 30 stores. So the investment is still relatively low. I would say start gradual and go big, but do not wait, because it's not like if they have a vaccine for coronavirus, everything is going to go back to the way it was. It might go back a little bit, but e-commerce is going to still leave these retailers behind. So ride the wave rather than get hit by the wave.
All right. Ride the wave rather than get hit by the wave. Thank you so much, Porter, for your insights and for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an honor, and best of luck, and stay safe over there, please.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Hazwan.